off we go then to currency conversion and foreign exchange. So, what do we propose for this PI for currency conversion and foreign exchange? Well, we propose that the API definition should be agreed, that a bounded context for processing these should be agreed, that an FXP simulator should be built and available for sandboxes and hackathons, and that the code build tasks should be agreed and started. Now, we've made good progress, I think, on the first one. They're not finally agreed, but I think I don't think anybody from the FSP-IOP special interest group who is on this call will disagree with me. At least I hope they won't. If I say that we are more or less in agreement about how the API should be structured, pardon me, for foreign exchange and currency conversion. We also have some more or less agreed sequence diagrams showing how this will happen if currency conversion is undertaken by the payer DFSP or if it's going to be undertaken by the payee DFSP. I'll come back to that in a bit. We didn't get as far as agreeing a bounded context or indeed agreeing and starting the code build tasks. And I'll explain why that was a little later on. And I'll come back to the FXP simulator. So what we had was a further wrinkle. We had an implementer, a real genuine implementer, come and ask us the question, using this functionality, would it be possible for currency conversion to be controlled by the switch? Now, those of you who have been at these presentations in the past will, I'm sure, remember that one of the things I said we were going to do is remove the switch's position in this and make currency conversion a matter for a conversation between a DFSP and a foreign exchange provider, a currency converter. So they could do that on their own. They could either do it per transfer, payment versus payment, or alternatively, they could make a bulk purchase of currency if they wanted to, and then simply use that to fund particular transfers. However, the question we were asked is, could it be controlled by the switch? Now, the advantages of that would be that existing participants in real schemes wouldn't need to make changes to their applications or to their operating practices. Second, problems associated with the existing two-transfer model would be removed. Pardon me, I think I'm allergic to the existing two-transfer model. Yes, so as you know, we have currently been implementing a very simple currency conversion model, which effectively says that each transfer which uses currency conversion will be split into two transfers. One between the payer DFSP and the foreign exchange provider in the source currency, and a second between the foreign exchange provider and the payee DFSP in the target currency. And there are problems at the moment with the fact that there are circumstances in which one of those transfers can succeed while the other one fails, which is obviously a problem for recovery and hence for straight-through processing and hence for low-cost operation. So those are the advantages that people really wanted to, effectively they wanted to solve the two-transfer problem while not requiring that the existing participants did anything different from what they do now. So what questions did we have to answer about this? Well, first of all, how would the switch identify that a transfer required currency conversion? The way in which we had planned for that to be done is that as part of the response to a get parties request, the payee DFSP would respond with a list of the currencies in which that account could receive funds. So the payer DFSP would then know immediately that the transfer required currency conversion if it did. However, we're now saying we don't want the DFSPs to do anything different from what they do now. So the question is, how will the switch find out, since that information will not be available, at least not available in that form? Second, how will a switch interact with an existing FXP? Because, of course, it's not just the participants that we need to think about, but also the currency converter who is currently doing those functions. Third, how will we ensure that participants see what they expect in the ledgers? I will get on to what happens in the ledgers a bit later on, but in principle, one of the consequences of the newly proposed way of doing foreign exchange is that that a participant may have transfers in currencies other than its home currency, with the proviso that those will always net to zero. So they will never be in a situation where they have a liability in the course of settlement in any currency other than their home currency. Next, what about state? How is that going to be managed? And finally, what about non-repudiation? So I'm going to go through these questions in order. So first of all, how will a switch identify that a transfer requires currency conversion? Well, it's simple enough. There's a database query. There isn't at the moment, but there easily could be a database query, which was just issued as part of processing the post quotes and post transfers endpoints to say, is this transfer denominated in a currency which the switch registers as being one in which the payee DFSP can receive? Now, that information is already in the database, so it can be retrieved relatively readily. And since the DFSPs will not change their message structures, the new form of notification won't be activated. But if it is, the switch will prefer to do that. Okay, so that answers that question. It's a relatively simple one, I think. And we can use a configuration item to turn switch activated currency conversion on or off, since we assume that this will be something which schemes implement as a whole and not per DFSP. Next up, how will a switch interact with an existing FSP? Well, fortunately, that's a nice easy one. We can easily configure a payment manager such that it looks like a new style foreign exchange provider to the switch, but acts like an old style foreign exchange provider to the FXP. So we treat that as a problem which may not be in detail, completely simple, but at least we should find that relatively easy to fix. How will we ensure that participants see what they expect in the ledgers? And that is a debit from the payer DFSP and a credit to the FXP in the source currency, and a debit from the FXP and a credit to the payee DFSP in the target currency. Whereas in the new way of things, we're expecting to see a debit from the payer DFSP and a credit to the FXP in the source currency, a debit from the FXP and a credit to the payer DFSP in the target currency, and a debit from the payer DFSP and a credit to the payee DFSP in the target currency. So we actually see the currency conversion between the payer DFSP and the payee, and the FXP in the form of a pair of transfers, one in the source currency, one in the target currency, and then the transfer of funds itself takes place simply in the target currency. So this will require specialist processing from the switch. We need to think about that and how it would be done. And it might be relatively simple. On the other hand, these things quite often aren't. Well, what about state then? So the switch will need to know about quotations, currency conversion quotations, currency conversion execution requests and responses, and transfer execution requests and responses. And it will need to maintain the relationships between all of those things at the same time. So there's going to be a pretty complicated set of operations that the switch will need to perform in order to keep track of the relationships between these various things, some of which will be generated by the DFSPs, i.e. The quotations and the transfer execution requests and responses, some of which will be generated internally by the switch, the currency conversion quotations and execution requests and responses. Now, here's the $64,000 question. What about non-repudiation? The switch will need to generate new messages in this world. It will be sending requests to the FXP to say, please perform this currency conversion. And it will also be sending requests to say, please execute this currency conversion. And it will be worse than that because it will be passing information back and forth, which will be in a different form. So let's imagine the situation. The payer DFSP sends a request to transfer in the source currency. The switch will intervene and it will recognize that the payee DFSP will not understand and will reject a request to approve a quotation in a currency which is not its own. It therefore needs to send a converted request that says, please accept a quotation for this amount in the target currency. When the payee DFSP responds, it will respond in the target currency with possibly fees attached. And the switch will have to intercept that, store it, and send back to the payer DFSP a quotation response in its source currency. So the content of the quotation request and indeed of the transfer request will be different for the two legs of the transfer, and therefore the non-repudiation signatures which were originally generated by the participants will no longer be valid. So the switch will need to construct the non-repudiation signatures itself. So the trusted originator of quotation and transfer messages will move from being the participant, as it is now, to being the switch. Now, there might be a philosophical objection here, which is that one of the things we have definitely tried to do as far as possible is to maintain the principle that the identity of the participant who issued a request should be the same as the identity of the entity which is guaranteeing the content of that request. What we're now saying is the request came from the original payer DFSP, but this form of the request is being guaranteed by the switch. On the other hand, we already create and sign error messages. Yes, I thought there might be Miller. And we already ask participants to trust the switch, for instance, in recording obligations. So the general conclusion is we can do it. We might very easily, I'm sorry, it won't be simple to do it. We have a detailed sequence diagram that describes how it could happen, which I'd be happy to circulate to interested parties. It's relatively long and complicated, as you might expect, but it does have all of the message contents and things like that. So it's a possibility. And it does have the great benefit of being able to get round the to transfer problem while not asking existing participants to change the way in which they operate. So I hear you ask, are there any alternatives? And my answer is there are always alternatives. Consider this, for instance. We send a request, please quote to transfer 5,000 West African francs. The non-repudiation signature, which you can just see above, comes from the payer DFSP. The switch passes that directly to an instance of payment manager, just as it was. Payment manager asks for a quotation from the foreign exchange provider, and it signs the non-repudiation with its own certificate, which is absolutely fine. The quotation comes back, it's signed by the FXP. Now the quotation goes through from payment manager to the payee DFSP. But because it's payment manager that manages the non-repudiation certificate, there is no non-repudiation certificate. That has already been passed by the payment manager. It just comes through as a direct synchronous request to the payee DFSP in a currency it recognizes. It comes back and says, I accept the quote for 10,000 Rwandan francs. Payment manager converts that and signs it. Sorry, I've left off the signatures from now on because I think you will see that pardon me, the signatures now all match up. In each case, the message is signed by the originator or by the payment manager, who is already a proxy for the payee DFSP. That comes back as accepting the quote for 5,000 West African francs, the payer DFSP, which now says, great, let's do the transfer. That goes through. The payment manager now asks the foreign exchange provider to execute the conversion. That's done. You can accept the payment of 10,000 Rwandan francs. And now everything goes back in the form that you would expect. So that's an alternative way using payment manager where you could get the same result sorry. Yeah, I agree. Error messages are not money. You're right. But yes, sorry, no, the payment manager is in the payee DFSP's boundary. So that's the standard place for a payment manager. And that is why payment manager is allowed to do things like non-repudiation signing and MTLS signing for messages. The messages come through between the payee DFSP and the payment manager in, as it were, raw form. They're not encrypted and they're not signed. It's the payment manager that adds the encryption and the signature and then sends the message out across the public internet to the switch.
So just to be clear, then the payment manager, there should be a dotted line essentially around PM and payee DFSP.
Exactly.
So that it's really the payee DFSP who's saying, I would like to get this currency business taken care of, and PM has some code for that purpose, but it's the payee DFSP that's doing that. And it's that the FXP is apparently hosted at the Switch Hub is somewhat independent. It doesn't have to be, it could be anywhere.
No, absolutely, yes. Sorry, it's just there, so because it fits in being above the switch. But you're right, I should probably have moved it across so it didn't seem like an extension of the switch.
No, but it's okay this way because it says that in the case where the switch scheme wants to run the currency conversion, such as, for example, in a dual currency national situation, they can do that. But in a case where no such thing exists, in your example here, 2 different countries, then you're essentially, the PM is free to say, I've got some stable of FX fees that I use, and I'll sort that out. The payee DFSP, I think as you're describing it here, doesn't have to care about any of that. They deal only in the local currency that they want to care about.
Yep. And I want to pick up Greg's point, which is to say, in the letter of the law, Greg, you're right. It's not the switch that's doing it, it's the PM. But on the other hand, the DFSPs are definitely not doing it, which I think was the original purpose.
Yeah,
there would there would be a PM per DFSP, as you say in your comment.
Yeah, I didn't really pay close attention to administrative boundaries, so it's still centralized at least. It's not out. It's not out at the DFSP.
Well, that's what I want to. That's what I want to clarify. Is that it is in fact at the DFSP because the administrative boundary says I own the keys and I own the actions. So that means the payee DFSP is commanding the PM to do these things, and it could easily say, I'm not going to participate. And it would then, and the PM would respond with a rejection, and that those things would be forensically strong. Otherwise, they're not forensically strong. If you have code running at the switch, and it's issuing all of the signatures and all of those things, then repudiation becomes a problem.
Yeah. I mean, the other attraction of this is that, as Greg rightly intuited, the switch in this situation is not doing anything different from what it would do if everybody was running a completely solid new standard foreign exchange provider interface. It's just that it's the PM that's doing the foreign exchange provider interface and not the DFSP.
Yeah.
I do want to see
the-
how you tie this together for settlement, though, because there's only one switch and only one settlement provider from what I can see. So
Well,
everything
as we
have to settle in XOF, right?
No. Oh, hang on a minute now. Now this is where I'm going to ask Simeon to cover his eyes, because I would like to move across. Are you now seeing some Excel stuff?
We are indeed.
Excellent. Well, this might be called a motor loop switch on a spreadsheet.
Oh, very nice.
So let me assume you will see from here that I've added some funds in. And now I'm going to find somebody, a pen. Okay, I get back the contents of the message and I get something that says, is a message, name discovery. That's all fine. So I'm sending from somewhere in Orange, Senegal. Doink, doink. And you'll notice the amount type can be send or receive. The currency conversion be done either by the payer or the payee. And we've got a currency converter over here is called Blue Bank. So I'm going to send 5,000 West African francs. I can see over there what it's going to be. And now I'm going to ask for a quotation. So I get a load of stuff that comes back here that tells me what all the messages were. And you'll see there's an FX quote that's gone from Orange Senegal to Blue Bank because we said the payer should do the currency conversion. That's come back and said this is the amount you're going to need to be sending in Rwandan francs. So now we get a quote request that goes through from Orange Senegal to MTN Rwanda, which is for 8,577 Rwandan francs. Jolly good show. And the MTN Rwanda says, yeah, I recognize all of that. It's completely snazzy. So we'll throw that away. Well, we won't throw it away because, of course, all of those messages are in the log over here. And now we can see that this transaction identifier that we've got here is available to execute. So we will go ahead and execute it. We get a whole load of stuff again. We can see liquidity check succeeded there. Somewhere up here, we should see this currency conversion liquidity check also succeeded. So that's all pretty fabulous, I think. So now when we look at the ledgers for Orange Senegal, we can see that it paid out 5,000 West African francs, and that's its balance. That was the funds it had already in there. So the available funds are now 45,000. That is the 50,000 it started with, less the 5,000 it sent. It's also got entries in the Rwandan francs ledger, but these always sum to zero because it's got money coming in from the currency converter from Blue Bank, and then the same amount of money going out again because it's being used to fund the transfer. So that all sums to zero. If we look at MTN Rwanda, all we see is a single movement that says it's got 8,577 francs. If we now look at the currency converter, we will see that it's got 5,000 of West African francs in, and those are now available. It's send out 8,577 Rwandan francs, so now its balance there is less than it originally was by that amount. Okay, that makes sense?
It does. So in this case, then the switch is managing both ledgers. And the point made here is that during settlement, there needs to be no pre-funding on the payee side because it will arrive from the FXP, who has to also participate in the settlement arrangement, but it now actually has to participate in two different settlement ledgers. It has to both on both currency sides, but because that FXP is at least a proxy for a DFSP serving in the FXP role, it doesn't look any different than if it were an actual DFSP serving in the FXP role. So it's possible for the switch to say, we offer this service for these two currencies because they're national currencies, or it could be that it's the CBDC thing we keep talking about could also work in the same way.
Absolutely.
So this is very interesting. Thank you. I appreciate you stepping through this. By the way, this tool
let me show
is
this
awesome.
again. Thank you. Let me show you this again. So now I've changed the currency conversion to be done by the payee, and I've changed the amount as well. So I'll just do a quote on that. That should be fine. So now we can see, oh yes, it's popped up here. We can execute it. Thank you very much. So now if we go to MTN Rwanda, we will see that MTN Rwanda has got 2,000 West African francs in, but it's paid them out to the currency converter to do the currency conversion. So its West African franc account balance is 0, but it's got the funds in Rwandan francs from the currency converter. And now if we look at the blue bank, we can see that the 2,000 came in here and 3,431 went out to MTN Rwanda. Just taking it on a bit further, I'm now going to, so I've got a third party here who is someone in Tigo Pesa in Côte d'Ivoire, who also uses West African franc. So in this case, currency conversion not required at all. I'm going to put an amount in like that. So both currencies are West African francs. I'm going to ask for a quotation. Now that's a much simpler one because there's no foreign exchange involved. Oh, I didn't want to do that, did I? Probably got a problem here. I knew this would happen. I'm going to ask for a quotation again. And this is the one that I want to execute. Oh, here we go, liquidity check succeeded. So now we can see that Orange Senegal, there was just a single movement, 3,000 that went out, and that 3,000 popped up in the West African francs account in Tigo Pesa in Côte d'Ivoire. So that's how all of that works. Any questions on that? Oh, I see we're at time. So all I have to do now is apologize to Simeon and indeed to Paula and probably to Catherine for doing a live demonstration when they told me not to.
We do appreciate the fancy Excel spreadsheet, the future of money transfer. Michael, thank you for sharing it.
It's a pleasure. Okay, so I think that is all I have to say, unless people have any more questions.
I'll allow the last question.
Oh, sorry. Let me pick up Douglas's question. So the answer is yes, it would be possible to imagine. So for instance, conversions to and from a reference currency. So let's imagine, for instance, that the payer makes a request of the FXP and says, well, let's suppose I want to convert I want to convert West African francs to Rwandan francs. The FXP comes back and says, effectively, I can't convert that, but I can convert it to dollars, US dollars. What am I trying to say? Orange Senegal can say, I would like to send this many dollars to Cote d'Ivoire, to Rwanda. And the Rwandan DFSP, MTN Rwanda, can now pick that up and say, okay, what I need to do is get a currency conversion from US dollars to Rwandan francs, which is probably going to be much easier, especially for an institution in Rwanda. So the answer is yes, it does extend to that, Douglas.
Awesome. Michael, because we're over time, do you want to give any
sorry.
finals?
Sorry, who sets the currency rate? The foreign exchange provider, Philip. So I've set those myself over here somewhere. There we are. So basically, these are all things that go to the dollar. So the idea is you actually do the same kind of conversion that Douglas was talking about happens inside the spreadsheet. Yeah. And on that, I will exit and stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Michael.
It was my pleasure.
Yes, and thank you so much, everyone. I see some chatter. I would advise that you all join Mojo Slack and have any follow-on conversations on there. This brings us to the end of day one. Thank you so much for coming and for enduring with us throughout this time.